My name is Cindy Stevens. I am the executive director of a national nonprofit for leadership development for high-need, hard-to-staff schools, and we work in multiple states. The name of our organization is Leadership and Education Effectiveness Group. I'm formerly of the Georgia Professional Standards Commission, where I became interested in this work. I'd like to introduce our presenters, please. Actually met them in previous meetings of this kind. Ann Bartelt has been a classroom teacher, curriculum director, assistant high school principal, assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, and administrative coach. She is currently serving as a student teacher supervisor for 2 universities and a curriculum and professional development designer at MESIC. Well, I didn't know what MESIC was, and I looked all over the internet to try to find out. I found out that it used to be the Mid-Iowa School Improvement Consortium, but is now the Members Impacting Students, Improving Curriculum Consortium, I guess. She leads MESIC's work with the Iowa Bureau of Educational Examiners to facilitate licensure renewal credits for successful completion of micro-credential tasks. Sue Beers has been a classroom teacher and curriculum director and is MESIC's director since its origin in 1998. As a national and international consultant, she works with hundreds of schools in areas of literacy across the curriculum, assessment practices, professional development design, leadership and coaching, and 21st century teaching and learning. And I hope you will tell us what that really is. She has authored 6 books for ASCD in these areas. Sue is also a designer, developer, and evaluator of micro-credentials and works with districts to design professional development systems that incorporate micro-credentials. Welcome to you both.
Good morning. It is still morning, right? Kind of feels like we didn't get in till like 1 o'clock this morning because of 4 mechanical problems on our plane. So, but we're here. So we're going to move really quickly through part of this. What we want to make sure you know is that everything you have in print, plus a whole bunch of other stuff, plus the PowerPoint is available at this address, this website. We use live binders for all our presentations. Everything is there. Plus stuff we're not even going to talk about today. So, and your access code is MISIC, so all capitals. So if you want to access everything as we're talking or even later on, so when you open it up, you're going to see a page that looks something like this, and you can find everything you want by going down the pages on the side to take a look at things. So there you go. So if you hopefully you have a chance to just quickly copy that down, and I think also we sent it to Robert so it can be posted on the KVEC site. Okay, well at the end of the session we'll put that back up again, the access codes and such. I'm going to do this in about 2 minutes because you already heard a lot of this with the keynote this morning, but I want to talk about why we came to the idea of micro-credentials. As a member-based consortium, we just started with a bunch of curriculum directors sitting down and saying, why are we doing all this alone? Why don't we work together? That was back in 1998. We're still together, but now we have about 80 districts, about 80,000 kids that are represented by those districts that we're working with, and we're also starting to work with some districts and schools, or should say schools, in the Middle East and also in a couple of states. So we've kind of like started to do more collaborations. But basically we said, we're doing a lot of professional development, but nobody's coming. So we started saying, why are they not coming? And we found there's a subs shortage. What people said is, I wanted to send 10 people, but I could only get 2 subs. And we said, so this isn't working anymore. We knew it kind of wasn't working anyway, but it's not really working. And I happened upon an article that was written by Robert. And I said, micro-credentials, I think that's what we need. I think that's the vehicle that will help teachers really be able to learn and grow. So, because we know the most important factor in the educational system is the teacher. Because a quality teacher can make up to a 52-point gain for students versus over 3 years versus 3 years with a teacher that is not a high-quality teacher. So we know that it's about the kids. We know if we maximize teachers, we maximize students. Period. So how are we going to maximize students? Well, we took a look at the research and the stuff that we've been working with, and we started to kind of swirl it all together. And we started with some of the work on the driving forces for improving instruction from Hall and Simmel. And those 3 factors, building relationships, increasing teacher capacity for learning, and strengthening teams. And where we thought micro-credentials hit the most is in that middle. Increasing teacher capacity for learning. So, and we'll see that we've started to build in the others as well. So we kind of looked at that work and said, yeah, we need to make sure that these micro-credentials do that. The second thing we worked at was the work by Daniel Pink. And Daniel Pink, if you've read his book Drive, how many of you have read Daniel Pink's book Drive? Okay. We know there are 3 things that motivate people. And professional development is all about motivation. If I don't want to learn this stuff, I'm not going to learn this stuff. You know, you have to want to learn it. You have to see a need. Or it doesn't matter how quality it is. It doesn't matter how rigorous it is. It doesn't matter how research-based it is. It comes down to motivation. And so we would say, we have a famous saying, every time somebody says, you know, what are we doing, why are we doing it, et cetera, we said, just remember, everybody is tuned in to station WIIFM. Everybody is tuned into station WIIFM. What's in it for me? Okay? And we said, so what's in it for me in terms of micro-credentials is we look at motivational theory. The first is autonomy or choice. You know, I do a lot of presentations to whole school staffs where nobody really wants to be there. They'd rather be in their room doing something else or going out for lunch. You know, so it's like they come in with an attitude. I don't want to be here because I'm supposed to be here. I have to be here. You know, and I'll tell them flat out, I know you think, you know, I know that that's probably, you know, some of you might have gone in the teacher's lounge and gone, oh God, another in-service today. What are we going to have to do now? Right? So choice is important. The second thing is challenge. Just the right amount of challenge. Not too hard, not too soft. That's what I call it the Goldilocks challenge. Just right for where I am and moving me forward. And the third is mastery. Everybody wants that I got it kind of attitude, right? Everybody wants to say, I mastered it, I got it. And in fact, what we're finding with micro-credentials is teachers want them to validate their skills as much as to learn new skills. In fact, that's even a more important thing. Teachers want that recognition that I have this skill. And so rather than using it as a carrot and stick kind or a stick kind of thing, it's more of an internal, intrinsic motivation that here's the proof that I have this, that I got this, that I mastered it. So if we take that research and we combine it with John Dewey, who said, we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So if we kind of took all those together and we combined that with Joyce and Schauer's model that you saw earlier today about what makes good professional development, we looked at all of those things together, said how do micro-credentials really align with what we know about motivation, about good learning, about teacher improvement. And we looked at that whole idea of the knowing-doing gap. We know the good stuff, we just don't do it. It's like, I know I should eat better, but I don't do it. So it's until you do it, it doesn't matter if you know it, right? Doesn't matter if you know it. So we wanted to say, how do we bridge this knowing-doing gap that we have? And one of our former team members, she finally decided to retire completely from education, said, it's not about professional development. That is the wrong term. We should quit calling it professional development. We need to call it developing as professionals. We need to treat people as professionals, and we need to say, it's professional development is something we do to you. Developing as a professional is something we do to become more professional. So we've kind of adopted the DP model here. So why micro-credentials? Why then Dresden? We've all heard all the things about what are micro-credentials, what they are. We liked what we were seeing about just-in-time, job-embedded, personalized, etc. But we also said this is, we knew this was part of a system. And we believe the best way our schools have been using micro-credentials is in that system that involves having them use them in their PLCs, in their departments, in teams. Remember Hall's work? One of the other two surrounding improving teacher learning was building relationships and teams. So it's like we need to have people working together. Yes, it can be an individualized pathway. Yes, it can be something that's personalized, but it also can be a vehicle for groups of teachers to learn together. The coaching, what we will tell people is, and we learned this on the evaluation side, that the evaluation isn't where the coaching should happen. Before they ever turn in the product and says, I think I've got it now, they need to have lots of coaching that happens right in the classroom and right in among their peers. And so we've had a lot of teams use the micro-credentials as a group learning process. So they investigate it together, they learn about it together, they talk about it together, they go out individually, collect their artifacts, bring them back to the group, look at them together, and they coach each other. And the coaching part really needs to come too as part of the learning. I have to have somebody that has a sounding board with it. Now we have teachers who are doing them individually too, and fine, but we find the most power in that coaching that happens before they turn in the product to be evaluated. And so that's been Ann, would you have anything to add to that?
We really did think about the teaming work when we designed our micro-credentials and really encourage people to look at it as a team. And also part of that is that embedded coaching that happens as they work together. So they learn together, they implement in their classroom, they observe each other, they provide that kind of feedback, and then that group reflection is really a very, very important piece to the micro-credential as well.
And it doesn't mean that the individual isn't responsible for their own artifacts, their own demonstration of the skill, but it's that learning and that coaching and that deepening of understanding, which Joyce and Showers has said since the 1990s, that is important in all of this. So we're going to go down this path. And last year when we were here, we were kind of new. We were just getting started. We had our list of topics we wanted to develop. There were 200 and some on the list. And everybody said, oh, go slow. You can maybe do 4 or 5, 6 a year. And we said, we don't have time to do 4 or 5 or 6 a year. We got about 6,000 teachers with 6,000 different needs, and we have 80 school districts and 80,000 kids waiting. We can't go slow. We're going to jump in. So we now have a catalog of 52 micro-credentials and 14 stacks that are available to our districts, and we are continuing to build all the time. So in order to have consistency and rigor, we looked at several models of micro-credentials, and we developed our own hybrid model, which is what you have in print there. But everything starts with the learning targets, and especially right across here. The first thing we have to define, and the most difficult part in writing them, was clearly defining the learning target, the skills that would be measured, and the task that would prove it. Everything else came after that. That's where everything starts, is on this plane between these 3 things. And there are times we've looked at a micro-credential. We had somebody that wanted us to write a micro-credential on how to handle angry parents. And we said, yeah, I could give you some advice, I could give you some tips, but your proof of it, about the only thing we can do is videotape you with an angry parent, and that is not going to fly well. So I don't think that's a micro-credential. I don't think it's micro-credential happening. At least not in our estimation right now. Because we say is if you can't prove it by the task, then it's not a micro-credential. Because a micro-credential is the doing part of it, at least in our system. But we also want to give people, besides that, some resources and some possible pathways to get there. We have districts who have to determine whether they want internal validation or external validation. Internal validation, and that's where the bulk of our schools have used it. Ann, and you can jump in anytime, Ann, if you want. But internal validation was where the bulk of our schools, we thought we'd be, just like smothered with people turning in micro-credentials for, for certification and for evaluation, and that was not the case. They were being used internally for teachers in need of improvement plans. They were being used internally with our PLCs and small groups. They were used internally as sometimes a whole staff or a whole building. But it was not, they were using them for the learning, but they weren't going out for that external validation at this point.
We also found, though, in this beginning year, that principals or other administrators within the school were a little uncomfortable or a little leery or a little feeling not so sure of themselves when it came to looking at a completed microcredential. So they're asking us, would you read this? Did they do it? Is everything here? That kind of thing. So we're learning that we need to support administrators as well in, one, understanding what a microcredential is, how do you read it, and then how do you validate it as part of a teacher's learning. So if they're doing it internally, where the district or school principal might say to them, you need to select a microcredential this year with your team or individually and complete it as part of your learning plan, well, then what? So they were kind of figuring out that doing gap with administrators as well. So let's back up, though, to the slide. I want you to talk a little bit more about the resources and the possible
let's
pathways.
Go through. We have the whole thing there. Let's go through the model with them.
Okay. We'll do it there.
So basically, it's kind of a simple process. You select a task, you perform the task, you submit the evidence, and if you pass, you get the badge, right? Pretty simple kind of process, a little bit. But then we have districts who wanted external validation, who do want to have someone from outside of the system evaluating the work of the person completing the credential and awarding the badge. We've started to work with a couple of our universities to use stacks for college credit, and again, that whole issue of hours and competencies and all of that kind of, how much time does it take? We'll talk about that in a minute. But then we were very blessed to be able to work with our Iowa Bureau of Educational Examiners, who were, in our state, you can keep your teacher certification by taking a combination of college credit courses, licensure renewal credits, and experience, correct? I got two folks from the Bureau here. And so licensure renewal credit is one of those pieces that you can use to help maintain your certificates, your teaching certificates. And so we worked with them to become a approved provider of licensure renewal credits for teachers in our state, so that when they complete a stack successfully, we can award a licensure renewal credit. And as I said, we have 14 stacks that are currently prepackaged, but then we also work especially with groups or school districts on developing kind of custom stacks that might kind of meet their needs a little better, because there's lots of ways to slice and dice that. Ann is our licensure renewal credit contact person. Ann, anything that you would add to that?
When micro-credentials by themselves are really critical learning pieces, correct? We all agree about that, and how valuable they can be to an individual teacher or a learning team within a building. So there's that value that's really important about thinking about micro-credentials. And then there's the value when you combine them into some kind of credit or licensure renewal credit. It's interesting, I'm just beginning to learn about how the state's systems are also different in thinking about licensure renewal and what states require for that. So when we were working with the Board of Educational Examiners in Iowa, we had to work with it. We worked within their parameters for what does a license renewal credit mean, and how is it defined, and what are the requirements, and then thought about how our micro-credentials can work within that system, and how those micro-credentials won't lose any benefit to the individual teacher, but only be improved through that partnership with the BOEE and those licensure renewal requirements. So it was really kind of some deep thinking and back and forth conversation with them about how we can keep the rigor, we can keep the same value of the micro-credentials, and also, and it's an and word here, also provide the licensure renewal credit for them. So those conversations were really healthy, and we were able to work out a system that benefits everyone.
So our first step was to put together and we're using the vernacular that we needed to use with our Board of Educational Examiners so that they had consistency, which we were happy to do that. So instead of calling them stacks, we're calling them courses for licensure renewal credit. But a course is a stack of micro-credentials that are aligned. So the document that I think you have a copy of it somewhere in your pile there as well, and there's also on the live binders ones. So the first step is to put together kind of this document that outlines what's in the stack, why is it put together, what is each micro-credential within the stack, and together they collectively create a course. Now we had the hour requirement, so we had to make our best guesses, and that's true of any course you take. How long is it going to take somebody to do this? Well, I don't know, the average person 5 hours, you know. So we look at the task only. We said, if you're going to do the task well, about how much time would it take a person to do this? Is it a 3-hour task? Is it a 5-hour task? And then what we have found in reality is our estimations were very low. And because we did not figure in time for the learning piece. In other words, you know, the investigation of resources. Someone who really already has the skill and just needs the validation can go right to the task. Others who maybe don't know so much about it, are newbies or only have a little bit of knowledge about it, may have to use more of the resources and the possible pathways to get there. So we just said it's fairest just to look at the task. You know, somebody may say, it took me 15 hours to do one of these. Yep, but we're only giving you 4 hours credit because, you know, that's what the task takes. Does that make some sense? And that's the most difficult part in terms of keeping those two systems together. But if anything, we think we grossly underestimated the amount of time each micro-credential would be, but we haven't had anybody complain yet. So I guess that's good.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big takeaways we took from last year was the importance of the rigor. And we heard Marianne and some other references this morning. When I came into the last of this first session here, talking about sit and get and what value is that, but we'll check it off for our licensure renewal credit versus actual production and implementation in the classroom as part of this really valuable learning. So I think the rigor and the expectations of the micro-credential are really important to a teacher's development. And if the teacher has the skill and is quick through their pathway and is able to implement and provide that evidence, then they're good to go.
So that was kind of in our work with the BOEE, and it went very smoothly. We had great people there to work with. We were able to kind of establish this, you know, procedure for developing stacks for licensure renewal. Or we also have, it'd be the same format that we would use if we were creating a college credit. Same format, same kind of work as well. So that's the one thing. That's the when I write a stack, I always start with that piece because I want to see what are the pieces that accumulate to make a bigger piece. And then what is the grains, we really have a lot of conversations about grain size. Grain size to us in our system, and I think it's okay if systems have different things, but in our system, a grain size is a skill you can pinpoint and demonstrate. So if it gets too big, then what skill are you really showing if there's multiple skills in there? Does that make sense? So we say we'd rather have a micro-credential focus on a specific skill and then stack them together to be a course, but not be a course and then there's multiple skills in there, so how do you get a task that shows a skill? So we've been kind of really having lots of conversations about grain size. In fact, some of the first ones we wrote will probably be going back and tearing apart and define our grain size because we think it's too big. I mean, I think it's, we want to make it also doable. So we have 52 micro-credentials right now, 14 pre-built ones, and then we are starting to work on several bundles. Right now, we're to the point where instead of us going through our list of what we wanted to create, our districts are telling us which ones they want. So I need a micro-credential on this, I need a micro-credential on this, I need a micro-credential on that, and that's where we're taking our priorities. So when we built our template for the micro-credential, which you have here, we looked at several models of micro-credentials, and this is the pieces that we have in ours. We start with what it is and why it's important. Short, brief, cite the research so people know this isn't a fly by the seat of your pants, somebody just thought this was a good idea kind of thing. But what's the research? Give us some research. We give them some questions to think about their current practice, and this is where using it in a small group has been really outstanding. Because now, when we're meeting as a team, we have some questions to focus on to talk about current practice. To reflect on current practice. And then the task. We jump right to the task first. So what do you have to do to show that you can do this? What's the proof going to be? And then we give the learning targets. And then we have two things called the possible pathway. And you have a copy of this, by the way, in front of you. What's a possible pathway to completing the task and for learning to complete the task? We did not want to do this, then we're an online course, right? Big difference between an online course and a micro-credential that we keep harping at in our organization is, in a micro-credential, I find my own pathway to the learning. In an online course, many times, I'm marching through a given set of things, right? So in a micro-credential, I look at the task and I say, I can start doing this and prove I've got it. Or if I'm not too familiar, here's some possible things you might do to start your learning. It's never a numbered order of things. It's never a do this and then do that and then do this. It's like, watch this video, read this article, go to this website. And I pick my own pathway. If I'm a video, I don't like videos. I don't know why. I just don't like watching them, I guess. So I'm not going to probably pick that as my personalized learning pathway. But I do like to read articles, so I'm going to probably go to that. Or I might go to a website. So probably what we try to do is put what we call the prime, kind of the best resources there, that, kind of bit simple. And then there's the other piece, which is the additional tools and resources. So now if you want to go even deeper, here's some more things you might do. So they could go to either one. They could go to the resources first or the possible pathways. But the possible pathways are a little bit more, when I say gentle, maybe not so overwhelming, a little bit more step by step, not step by step, but steps in it. And then we define success criteria. So if you complete this micro-credential, what must it look like? And we chose to use a one-column rubric. So in order to get credit, you have to successfully meet every criteria. There's no, if you get 4 out of 5, you pass, or whatever. You have to at least pass, you have every single criteria met before you'll get credit. And that's where we spend the second most amount of our time besides the task, is in defining success criteria. what it is, what it looks like, how will we use, does it clearly lay out what's expected from the task so that we have that rigor and we have that clarity around the task. So people aren't wondering, well, what it is I'm really supposed to do here? What's it look like? And that also serves as the evaluation tool. So when evaluators get it, they look at it, and that is the thing they comment on, that is the piece that they use to determine whether or not someone met the micro-credential. And then we also have some questions for reflection that they must complete as part of the task. And they're all metacognitive, like what was the most difficult part of this task? What do you think most improved in your teaching? What would you do differently? How did it impact your teaching? How do you now teach differently than you did before you did this learning, etc. So they're all questions that really get them, as John Dewey said, to reflect on their practice as well. And then we also aligned everything to the Iowa teaching standards, so there's a page where we check what part of the Iowa teaching standards they would have been working on and would have been aligning with. We're working with an ESU in Nebraska, so now we're going back through them and aligning them all to the Nebraska teaching standards, so they have a Nebraska version of it as well. Whew. So you have copies of, what you have is on the first page, I think, is what we call our developer notes. So nobody gets to write a micro-credential till we've taken them through the training on it. And the training is basically, walking through the whole process and talking about it, and then they have to sit in the room and start to write one while we're there, so we can coach and give feedback, and they can ask questions and they can do things. And then we have a process for going through anything that's submitted and being able to have conversations around quality and rigor and clarity of the micro-credential. Ann, you want to add anything to that piece?
We wrote a micro-credential for writing a micro-credential.
We did.
Yeah, we did. And used it in our training.
Ann wrote it. Ann wrote it.
And it was really pretty fun to do. And you don't really understand, what's in a micro-credential until you have to put one together. So if you're thinking about that for your people, that might be a little exercise that you take yourself through. And if you want to see that micro-credential, talk to Sue or me about that. Sue mentioned it, and we cannot emphasize this. It was a big learning curve for those of us who have planned, developed, and facilitated professional learning for years. And to rethink those possible pathways and that personalization that's so important to micro-credentials. Because we're used to, step by step, we're going to put everything together, and this is what we're going to do, and this is our first little activity, and we'll present this information, and then we'll talk about it, and we'll reflect on it, and then we'll go to this activity, and we'll do this, and then we'll watch this video, and then we'll do this. So we had to really undo that thinking and allow choice in those possible pathways. So we were pretty careful, too, about making sure that we provided quite a variety of resources for people to use as they were in their learning phase.
So completing it is one thing, right? And the bulk, we thought we'd be like swamped with the need to evaluate. And basically, it was like, I wanted to put a picture up there that, somebody looking really crazy and saying it was all good until you asked me to evaluate it. Because that's where the sticking point becomes, is if you're going for external validation, instead of, we really think the best improvement we've seen in teaching is the internal model. where it's not just sent out for somebody to evaluate, but we are talking about them and we are using them and we are having conversations. Our principals tell us that having those reflection questions and having the success criteria has given them the look-fors they need in the classroom to be able to say whether it's happening or not. Because as we know, I can go and, I think one of the presenters today I listened to said teacher observations were found to be fairly worthless. Well, it's because I don't know what I'm even looking for. What does it look like? I used to make sure I always had a new bulletin board every year because that's what was important to my principal, and he would overlook all the other stuff and say I had a nice bulletin board and then I got a good evaluation. So we want to get it deeper than that, right? We want to get it to the point where we can have conversations as a principal, as an assistant principal, as a instructional coach, as members of a PLC. And that's, to me, what framing these micro-credentials is really helping us do. But in terms of evaluation, we have a plan. First of all, we say you cannot be an evaluator of a micro-credential if you've never completed one. And we'd really like to also make sure you've also written one. Because as Ann has said, you don't know what it is until you've been through the process. And so last week, we were in Omaha doing 2 days of training on evaluating and writing micro-credentials. And everything was great the first day when we were writing, and they were working on them. And then we went to evaluation, and we gave them some samples of things that had been submitted to us, and we asked them for their input and how they would do, what they would do with it, and so on. And they said, "This is hard. This is really hard. Can you just do it?" No. So we are developing a pool of certified raters, and you only get certified if you have successfully completed a micro-credential in that field, like English language arts or science or math or something, and you have some credentials to be able to say, yeah, you really know what you're looking for and you know what you need. So we're pretty rigorous in that process. Okay, Ann, anything you would add on the evaluation piece?
You might have some thoughts about the single point rubric, and Sue mentioned that we had a long conversation about that. In our writing a micro-credential, we provide several resources on the single point rubric, and one of my favorites is titled something like, "Where has this been hiding all my years of teaching?" Because it really is a very valuable tool, and it simplifies things and makes that success criteria right there in front of the doer and the evaluator, and it still allows for lots of feedback. And not yet, you're not quite there. These are things you need to look at, and yes, you made it, or you've exceeded this single point. So we did learn with our Nebraska team last week that and we knew this, but there was a little slip up a time or two, so you want to be very careful about the clarity of your rubric and it matching your task. We were working with micro-credential on inquiry and on writing questions, and the first little cell was about something about the questions. Well, the cell meant to refer to the essential questions and the compelling questions rather than the supporting questions, but we hadn't clarified that in the rubric. So that's just a very simple change that we can make, but those are things you learn as you work through your first time. So don't be afraid or worried about making adjustments to your micro-credentials, and whether it be the wording in the task or the pathway resources or the success criteria. Because as we know, in all work that we do, it's work in progress, right? So professional development, we'll make changes, so the next time we do it, when we're teaching, we'll make changes from class to class throughout the day.
Our micro-credentials are in a constant state of change, of, fix as we see errors and as we work on things. So we're constantly going back. So we want to turn it over to you for questions or even sharing. What are you doing in your district? I think we've had a lot of state level kinds of conversation today. Is there anybody that's doing something in a district with micro-credentials they would want to share?
I said I'd like to make a comment to that. That question has been asked in other meetings about micro-credentialing, and the response has been pretty much the same. So congratulations, you're in sync. But I have to wonder, when I see the response of what's happening at the districts, mostly to be this or not much, are we really looking at all of this from a helicopter's perspective? And that becomes really important with what you said about the internal, what you all said about the internal piece for the development as professionals. Because if we are looking at it from a helicopter state or national level perspective, or even regional service agency, without getting it down to what is the district doing, then we're not hitting the mark, it would seem. What are your thoughts?
One of the things I appreciate about being here in Kentucky with our friends in Kentucky is the size of the school districts. Small, rural, and we work with many small rural school districts as well. And one of our school districts came to us and said, during our professional development time, we need support for our singleton teachers.
Oh, okay.
You know, those who are alone, one industrial technology teacher, one computer science teacher, one family and consumer science teacher. How can you help us with that? And so we worked with them and created micro-credentials that would support those teachers in their learning. So that's one of the benefits of micro-credentials, is you can tailor them to the audience that you have.
Hi, I'm Alan Young. I'm from Jefferson County, right here, where we have over 100,000 students in our district. So there are a couple pretty big ones.
Okay.
And we've been working on a performance assessment micro-credentials pilot with the Center for Collaborative Education in Boston, and then also with some supporting help with the Center for Teaching Quality out of North Carolina. And we've, I feel like the pilot itself has been fairly successful, but one of the things I really appreciate about what you brought forward is that it really is about the journey and the process by which, like, you have these pathways that you've suggested for, because a person's motivation is really the main thing that will carry them through. First of all, is this something that is in an area I need? And if it's only an extrinsic motivation of I'm just doing it to get this badge, or I'm doing it in order to be able to get to a next level, those are fine. Or if externally validated things that's very high standard to have it go out, as well as disconnected to what you might need. What we found here is that it was much more likely that folks will complete the micro-credentials if not only were they motivated, but they were doing it with someone else.
Yep.
It's just incredibly tough to show things. So for me, I also appreciate how, I liked how you used the word challenge. For me, that's a better word than rigor. Rigor is something that we just all externally do, regardless of the person. But what's challenging for me may not be challenging for you. And these micro-credentials have all areas of challenge. They're not just rigorous, they're challenging depending on where they are and how they meet you. That's the personalized part.
And support is different for different challenge.
That's exactly right. And so as a large district, we had to find out, since we have 90 elementary schools, we have 25 high schools, 25 middle schools, to do this across our district, how will we be able to honor the variety of people that are interested in performance assessment as we move towards a deeper learning kind of approach for kids and for adults? But also, how do we make sure that we know how to support them so that these singletons that might be just here or there are not just alone? Because it can be quite isolating, and then when you see this whole array of things, if these are just prescribed actions to do all of this stuff, you're going, that's an awful lot. So for me, I really feel like the notion of worrying a little bit less about rigor, because first of all, these are all way more rigorous than sit and get.
Amen.
So already the rigor is there. You have to demonstrate. And remember, if you're demonstrating something that's not that hard, well, you're still discreetly saying you have this skill. Some of our skills are not as hard. That's fine. And when you're getting to a really tough skill, that's really hard. So it's really thinking about rigor or challenge in that way, but really thinking about the other part of this, and that is the internal motivation and the social aspect that we could really lose if we just think that this is just some clinical set of things that I just walk through and somehow I just have to be self-motivated and I don't get to do it with anyone that doesn't match anything in my situation. So we felt our pilot has taught us a lot about what gets people through this. And I just wanted to make sure we added that in the room, and certainly would love to work with all our folks from Kentucky and across the country about how to move this forward as an avenue, and maybe even, like you said, less for just professional learning. That's the pathways piece, but more about validating what particular kinds of demonstrated capacities that you have.
Right. Exactly. And, you know, and one piece of research we didn't put on the slide, but we used a lot in our development, was the adult learning theory. That, you know, people want to be honored for their experience and for their knowledge, and they want to be able to kind of, you know, be able to, you know, kind of pride themselves, you know, slap them, you know, hit, you know, pound, slap, whatever, pat themselves on the back a little bit sometimes, because we don't get that a lot in education. We don't get a lot of pats on the back from anybody. So, but you are correct that what we have seen is the teachers, I would say 90 to 95% of teachers want to work together with another teacher in completion of the micro-credential. And they still have to turn in their own proof. They still have to turn in that I can do this myself, but the learning part definitely is enriched. You know, I don't know if we can put a number on it with that way. Yeah, 5 minutes. So any other questions? Yeah.
1 minute. Wait, let me get
Oh, here comes the...
We can't catch it on the video.
And by the way, while we're waiting for that question is, you know, we're just kind of like, we're just lowly country people who just wanted to do something good. We don't have any funding outside we have no grants, we have no external funding, we have no state funds. We have only the dollars that are pooled by our districts, and our districts pay $2 a student. We have 80,000 kids. You do the math. How much money we've been working with to get this done.
That actually gets to my questions. Who is participating in your micro-credentials, and how is that determined, and then how is that funded? Once the participants know, and then I have a next question. I'll go ahead and say while I've got the microphone, how do you decide on the number in your stacks? So those are kind of two chunks.
Okay, I'll answer the first question on funding. Basically, we work on a very shoestring budget. We're all there, 5 of us part-time. That's it. That's our staff. So we do offer some, you know, because of the licensure renewal credit, we do, like, that's how the evaluation part is paid for, because they have to pay for the licensure renewal credit, and that in turn pays for that person to do the evaluation. We do have, we just are entering into a contract with another educational service agency to provide our catalog for them, so their districts can use any of them they want at will. But if there's external validation needed, then they have to pay for the external validation. So even if it's not licensure renewal credit, they can pay us, or they can, yeah, and we're working and trying to develop that pool of things. So that helps us with funding a little bit. We do some conferences. We're doing a conference on social and emotional learning in October, and that's one of the ones that we also are getting a lot of requests for micro-credentialing around. And then we're working with, actually I said, I just had a contact. I did some work in the Middle East, and because of that, we have some school districts over there that are interested in just, you know, paying us to use the micro-credentials. You know, the validation, they're going to take care of, because I can't read Arabic. So We can't do the evaluation, they'll be done.
And who is your what's the platform that you're using to get those micro-credentials out to your participants?
PDF file. And our website. What do you mean?
So the evidence, if I'm participating and
Yeah, we're not doing an open system where the credentials, go out for like some kind of universal review. We're a closed system in that it's getting the materials together and generated for use.
in that PLC space or internally?
Right. Districts are primarily keeping their own badging systems. They are not, if we provide licensure renewal credit, we keep records of all that because that's a different level. But if it's simply, we're going to use them in our district, the districts are doing their own badging, are doing their own kind of, keeping track of things. Yeah. Oh, right behind you. I think we have one more question, and I think we have to end. Yeah.
So following up on the previous question and thinking about teachers who are singletons, one of the advantages of a PD is you go through it with other people, presumably in your building or your district, and so you can talk about it and try things out. And thinking about Daniel Pink, who based his work really on DC and Ryan, we know relatedness is a big component of intrinsic motivation. And yeah, some teachers may choose to work on it with a friend, but ideally micro-credentials, if I'm understanding them right, are driven by the individual. So I pick what I choose to do. So where's the relatedness component? Where's the discussion and engagement that way?
That's where a lot of them have used them with departments, PLCs, et cetera, where the department comes up with a problem of practice, and you have a micro-credential on discovering a problem of practice. So once they've come up with that problem of practice, then it's like, well, what could solve that problem of practice? And that's where they might say, well, I want to try this, and I want to try that, and I want to try this, and we might go out and do it separately, or we might say, let's all try this thing. And written into the micro-credential are those reflection questions and so on that allow us to have that conversation in kind of some guided ways.
Another example would be academic vocabulary. So we've got 4 teachers in 4 different departments, if you will, all by themselves, but they're all working on academic vocabulary. And so they can use tuning protocols and student work and examining that student work in a PLC or a peer feedback kind of situation. So while it's different content, the skill of teaching academic vocabulary and students using that academic vocabulary is common to that content.